Let's talk about sports in regards to physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. And I've been an athlete my entire life. We meaning my brother and I, we started playing hockey when we were 3 years old. And that really had a lot of weight on our self identity. And so things like competition, sports, or any aspect of that can really form our entire existence. And so let's talk about what that means and how we can harmonize ourselves within this sporting world. And I'd like to start with how we relate to it because there's a lot of information now coming out. I'm going to stand up. There's a lot of information now coming out about how ice baths aren't necessarily the greatest thing for us. And the research is basically saying that if an ice bath is stressful to you, then you're definitely not going to benefit from the stress of an ice bath. And that is assuming that an ice bath is stressful, because it's in that stress that it's producing a bunch of hormones like adrenaline, and those hormones are giving us a sensation of being high. And if we're constantly stimulating ourselves to do that, then that isn't necessarily the best thing for us. And I would say the same thing with sports. If sports are putting into your psyche view of the world that is defined by rigid rules and structures and listening to an authority figure like a coach, and the stress of winning or losing, each one of those aspects has a light side, a shadow side, and a gift side. And the individual's capacity and awareness to relate with all of those is going to determine whether sports and competition in the long run is going to be net positive or net negative in terms of a development of a person. And sometimes you can go into a net negative, which fortifies and makes you stronger to then translate into the world. And from a psychological standpoint, if you look at abused kids or kids that had a rough childhood, there's a critical point that makes it actually, it's like the point that goes from negative to positive. And I'm using negative and positive. I know both of those terms are actually neutral, but just in our general understanding of negative and positive, negative being bad for us, positive being good for us. So if you look at children from a psychological standpoint that are raised in a rough environment, that rough environment will actually give good attributes to a kid as long as that rough environment doesn't get to the point where the child or the person turns to destructive behavior. And destructive behavior would be things like self-medicating or suicide attempts. So if we can be stimulated enough within our environment that causes enough challenge, it allows us to develop mechanisms to orient ourselves within the environment to either keep us safe or keep us alive, or keep us in a competitive standpoint, keep us in the winning favor of whatever the environment is thrusting upon us. Those responses actually are going to translate over into success in life, as long as the pressure wasn't so much that it breaks the person. And that's from a psychological child development standpoint of like what in an environment is enough, because we know that if we put somebody in a completely comfortable environment, they will not develop. There's a certain amount of challenge that is necessary. For some reason, Alexander the Great just popped into my mind. He had a very, how can I say it, privileged childhood. his mentor was Aristotle. His parents were wealthy. Yet, when he was a teenager, he decided to leave home and conquer the world. And so there was a lot of challenge that Alexander put himself through. As a result of that was what was expected from him. And Alexander the Great is responsible for, like his purpose was to accumulate all of the knowledge in all of the cultures, and he brought it into the great library of Alexandria. And that library ended up being burned down, and there's theories that all of the wisdom from the great library of Alexandria is now underneath the Vatican, and there's miles, I even want to say hundreds of miles of library of scrolls and literature that's been collected from Britain throughout the ages. Things like how to time travel, how to manipulate reality, all of that is kept for the few initiated. Now back to sports. There's an interesting exercise that those of you who are doing sports or doing yoga or running for fun or biking for fun or doing competitive aspects, that it's a practice that will take several weeks to recalibrate your body to, but it can be very useful in allowing yourself to not relate with sports and competition in a stressful manner. Because if we're relating to it in a manner that's taking away our energy, like we don't have a good relationship to it, we're doing it because our mommy and daddy told us to, or because we're trying to win an award and we need to do this and we're suffering right now. If we can change the relationship to a harmonious relationship as opposed to suffering in training, then that's going to, from my perspective, add to the value of life in the current moment. We're not doing something now that we're suffering so that we can win in the future, but we're doing both. We're actually winning now, and our ability to do that is going to win in the future. And before I give you the practice, which is very simple, I'm going to say that I just saw a reel, who knows if it's true or not, about the difference between the top 5 tennis players in the world and the top 25. I don't remember the study, but somebody was quoting a study where they studied the top 5 tennis players in the world and the top 25 tennis players in the world. And the difference between the top 5 and the top 25, what it was narrowed down to was not diet, it was not coaching, it was not a whole bunch of other factors. The main factor was their ability to think in a positive mindset about all of the game. So even when the point goes out, how quickly can they bring themselves back into, I love tennis, so happy to be here out in the sun, as opposed to, gosh, I suck, why didn't I do that, yada, yada, yada. And you see that so much in sports. I'm horrible is so much self-assessment, so much judgment. Again, it comes down to programming. This is how our coaches talk to us. For me, in full contact sports, the coach's job was to keep us safe. And so they were very, very mean to us so that we were able to survive out in the sports field. That was, there was a whole other team that was trying to essentially kill us. And so the coach wasn't being Mr. Nice Guy. He was being angry and mean. And it's really easy to take our mentors, voices of our parents and our coaches that had this strong sit down and shut up mentality and bring it into our own head because of pressure. So the practice is, next time you're doing something competitive or in a sports standpoint, the practice is to not control your breath. It's to observe your breath, because it's so easy to look at our breath as, I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more, or we ignore our breath. So it's either I breathe more or I'm not even paying attention to my breathing and it's just happening. And the other option there is to observe our breath while we are in a highly competitive or highly intense training situation. And what will happen is when we observe our breath and we're releasing control, we notice that our body's taking care of itself. And just the act of observing our breath allows us to connect with that harmony, because the body is searching for the perfect amount of air. And once you can do that, the actual practice is to close your mouth while that's happening. Because we've learned to breathe through our mouth, because the mouth is how we get more air. So if we're not looking to get more, then we close our mouth and we let ourselves breathe. And we can open the mouth in the beginning. But is there a way? How does that work for Taekwondo, as they have to shout out so there's no breath so they don't get damaged? So what they're doing, and even boxing as well, where they're exhaling. So that's a function of the sport or the technique. You're exhaling and shouting as you're striking or blocking. And I would say still pay attention to the breath, because there's the in-between moments. If you're sparring for 10 seconds, you're in it, and then you step back, are you able to not do this? Because that's your mentality going into, I need air, I need air, I need air, inhale, inhale, inhale. So what I'm saying is release that expectation, and can you do it all through the nose? Because the nose is actually the breathing device. The mouth is a secondary device for emergency, and it sets off the bells and whistles in our body that we are under attack. And in moments where we're under attack, a whole bunch of things happen, like blood rushes from parts of our brain that we need access to develop in the moment and to perform as best as possible. Blood rushes from those parts of the brain into other parts of the brain that are purely for motor control. And the reason why it does that is because it's fight or flight. And what I'm saying is, if you're constantly for 18 years in a fight or flight mode, 1 to 10 hours a day training for a sport and competitive environment, that's training you on how to be a human being, and you're constantly in fight or flight. Are you able to be in a fight calm with all of your faculties registering? And even though you have to move fast and think quickly, are you able to also derive meaning and connection with your opponent, with the situation? And that's going to give you an enhanced sense of self, an enhanced sense of the present moment. And again, this is a practice. So we skipped right to like level 9 of the practice. But going back to level 1, which is, can you do a jog? Can you jog around the block without gasping for air? And even when you feel the gasping of the air, keep your mouth shut and let your body adjust. Your body will adjust. You'll run slower if you're just breathing through your nose. And then it'll adjust. And then tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, you'll find that you can run harder, faster, longer, breathing in this way as the body adjusts. Because actually, when you breathe less, more oxygen gets into the system. If we're hyperventilating, what's the cure for hyperventilation? For this is like an asthma attack. What's the cure for that? You have, like, you guys may remember this from popular culture, or maybe you even have a child, or when you were a kid. If somebody was going, what's the cure for that? They're inhaling. The cure for that is to make them breathe less by putting a paper bag over their mouth. And what does that do? It restricts the amount of oxygen that's coming in. Someone said, breathe in a paper bag. So you're restricting the amount of oxygen coming in. What does that do? Slow down, to relax and slow your breathing. Yeah. Why are we doing that? We're doing that, and the reason why we're grasping for air is because we're freaking out. I need to inhale. I need more oxygen. But guess what? Inhaling and increasing the oxygen in the body does not get more oxygen into the cells. It's the Bohr effect. And the Bohr effect is essentially that as carbon dioxide increases, your blood is going to turn slightly more acidic. And as your blood turns more acidic, the red blood cells are going to, it's the pH changes slightly. I'm not saying your blood turns to acid, but the pH goes more towards acidic. That signals the red blood cells, which is carrying oxygen, to release oxygen. So the only way for oxygen to get out of the red blood cells into the body is to increase the carbon dioxide. The way that we increase the carbon dioxide is to breathe in less oxygen. So this is one of those paradoxes that I'm hopefully representing in an accurate way that everyone can digest, where breathing less actually equals more oxygen. And so what we're tuned to do, and what we're just all taught in school and in life, is that when you breathe, oxygen goes into your body, just period. And that's not actually how it happens. Oxygen, we're always over-oxygenated. Our blood always has an extreme amount of oxygen. It's when the carbon dioxide builds up, which is not a poison. We think about carbon dioxide as poisonous and oxygen as life-giving. Carbon dioxide is a necessary component in our body. And so carbon dioxide builds up, the body signals, okay, let's transfer more oxygen to the body. So that's how, if we're connected to breathing out of our nose, the way that the body needs to breathe, not the way that we are forcing ourselves to breathe, we're actually going to have more available oxygen into our cells, which is going to equal performance. On top of that, so after we go through this practice, so this is stuff that I said weeks, and it could even be years before we can, quote, master this. Then we can be in the middle of a fight and be in that moment of awareness. And those who are fighting a lot, either through sparring in sports, or I played hockey, and so I was fighting once or twice every single weekend for a few years in my adult life. And I noticed that I fought a lot better if I had full capacity of my awareness and there wasn't a complete adrenaline adrenaline dump. Scott says it's the CO2 that creates the will to breathe. It's the motivation behind everything, right? And adrenaline is also looked at as a performance enhancing hormone. And I would disagree with that. And the people that are in the flow movement also would, I assume, disagree with that. Adrenaline is going to make you jittery, and it actually makes performance a lot more difficult. So the question that a lot of athletes and performers, even myself, I don't necessarily perform anymore, but I do go on stages, and that essentially is a performance. It's not an athletic performance, but it's a performance where I use my voice, I use my body, I use my energy to influence. And if there's adrenaline going and I'm starting to get the shakes and the shivers and my breath is tightening up, how do we get out of that, right? There's some breath exercise that I talk about all the time to get us out of that. That all has to do with slowing down the breath or focusing on the exhale, even something like breath of fire. Exhale, 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 exhale. That's going to clear the channel, but it's completely focusing on the opposite of the inhale. Inhales equal stress and anxiety. That's where I'm getting at right now. Now, sports, from a movement standpoint, if we look at our body as a complete fascial network, integrated, not just from head to toe and out into our fingertips and toe tips, because that's how we normally view the body. But if we view our body as situated within the environment that we're currently in, what do sports and competition offer us? They offer us an ability to expand our awareness of self. It offers us an ability to play within this environment. And that's one of the things that if you are well adapted to this environment and you're not reaching to survive and struggling through that process, but if you're well adapted to it, then sports can be very playful and we can learn a whole lot about our body and our body's relationship to other beings and to even stationary objects like the boards on a hockey rink, or objects that move like a bouncing ball or a puck, or objects that we manipulate like a tennis racket or a hockey stick or a lacrosse stick. And sports gives us that ability to function in the realm where we're able to develop a greater sense of ourself, the environment around us, and the things, the aspects that are ever changing in the environment. And it's a beautiful thing for psychological, spiritual, mental, and emotional development. There's also a score, and the score or the ranking, depending on your sport, is another playground that we get to mentally, emotionally process, spiritually even. How do we feel about losing? What does it mean to us? How do we feel about our competitor beating us? Or how do we feel about beating another competitor? On top of that, there's risk of injury. It's feedback if we get injured. Are we able to work around that injury? Are we able to practice our physical strength, our development, our agility, our balance, so that in the long term there's less injury, less losing, more winning? And again, this is all like it's a balance, and it's a school that I played sports my entire life, and I'm unsure if and when I have kids, if sports is going to be something that I suggest or invite into, because this is a wild school, sports. But those of us who were athletes get the dark sides and the light sides of what competition builds for us. It builds mental resilience. It builds relationship with others. It builds, even just losing and developing a sense of what loss means to you is amazing things. And I think that the most important aspect of this is, how are we relating to this? Because how you relate to one thing is how you relate to everything. And so if it's a constant struggle and stress, then that's how you relate to everything. And I've spent my entire life living with and being with athletes And a large majority of them, when I was, at least, if I think back in my memories, maybe they've ascended beyond it, but a large majority of them are developing skills based around comparison, based around self-worth, and it could be degenerative to the evolvement of our entire species if we have a sports focused, competition focused society. And things like art and music and dance can obviously be competitive, so can art and music, but art form. So when you put rules and a score onto something, I'll just say a score. When you put a ranking system into something, it goes from being an art form into a sport. And the sport is, even if it's the same thing, even if you're still doing dance and then you go into the sport of dance, or if you're doing skating on the ice, playing with friends, to playing hockey with the scoreboard and referees, that line is a wall that you hop over, and now you're in the realm of less art form and more for the score, and the score becomes more important than the art form, and you start noticing that you start to pinpoint the aspects of the art form that allows for the win, and those become more important, and other things become less important, like the priority of health is not so important in winning. In fact, the people that win the most are usually the ones that can deal with the most pain, the most injuries. And so that's another thing to look out for. But Bambi's saying it should still be artistic. This is the problem with ballroom dancing. Dance sport becomes too athletic. D says conscious parents are exactly what the sports need, especially hockey. It's very interesting that the only GAC says it's very interesting that our society values competition over collaboration. Right. So something that, yes, group sports will be good. As a parent, you will be on it. So no worries. Group sports versus individual sports is another whole difference. The pressures to perform are different in a team sport versus an individual sport. And what I would like to see is a version of sports that has a different foundation. Right now, the foundation is winning and losing. And there's a whole bunch of awesome lessons and development that can come from that. But what if we didn't define sports from this dualistic nature? And I heard Matthias DeStefano talk about the reason why duality is so strong on this earthly realm is because we have one sun, which is debatable, one sun that influences our reality by having a light cycle and a dark cycle. And as every single cell in our body has developed, we, like in this lifetime and all lifetimes leading up to this, we have biased light versus dark. And that's given us a biased based mentality where we have good versus bad, and it's light versus dark. And Matthias talks about being on other planets where he remembers his past lives. They're not really past, where he's remembering a current life that he's living now in another planetary system where they had multiple suns, and there was never this sense of light and dark, good and bad. And so all the foundation of everything is influenced by that. And think about how much our environment influences everything that we do. Even like, look at how many fingers do I have? 10? What do our numbers go in, we're in a base 10 mathematical system. What if we had 8 fingers? And what if it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? And then instead of 9 and 10, what we know of as 9 is actually 11. No, it would actually be like the 10 figure. What we know of as 10 is actually 11. Like, that changes everything about math, even though it's the same number. It's the same, different names for the numbers, but it's the same amount, I should say. So we do base our concept of reality around what's actually happening within this reality. And if things were happening differently, like as if there was no darkness that ever happened, would we relate to the concept of winning and losing or good and bad the same? Would we think about dying as like an ultimate darkness? Or would we just not even have a concept of darkness? And what it, that would all develop into a different nature of being. And we would look at things more as a cycle, because it's just an everlasting cycle, not so distinct. A day is like, this day is over and another one begins. And same thing. And then we can just define the seasons as the same way and the year as the same way. And not much beyond that. We don't really go much beyond a yearly cycle, even though there's tons of cycles that go beyond a year. That lots of cultures, that's why the Mayans have like thousands of year-long calendars, that supposedly ended in 2012, right? Like they're tracking other cycles. And what are these other cycles? What do they mean? Any other questions or comments I can go over about sports? Sports definitely influenced my entire childhood. And I got to the point, and so I was 3 to 23, hockey was my main thing. And then I moved to California and opened a gym, and eventually found CrossFit and translated my gyms into mostly CrossFit gyms. And then there was CrossFit competitions, and I got into that. And then I was one of the top few hundred CrossFitters in the world for 6 or 7 years. And then I was having a conversation with a very good friend, and it came up that I'm an athlete, identified as an athlete. And then I realized that I don't know what else I am. Like, wow, I don't know actually who I am besides an athlete, besides being the fittest person in a field, like literally ranked from 1 to whatever. I'm this rank. I'm 14th fittest person in California, or I'm the first place at a competition amongst 100 other men who are all competing and training to be the best at this thing. And I'm standing on top of a podium, or I'm not standing on top of a podium, and I'm looking at somebody else standing on top of the podium that I'm not standing on top of. That's how I identified. And eventually I was like, whoa, what else am I? And so I actively closed my gym and actively ate as little amount of food and protein, especially, as I could for a few years, and shed a bunch of muscle off my body. That was a whole journey of going from, obviously this person works out and competes, can walk on his hand, like can do everything, backflips, like anything that you could think of, riding on a unicycle while playing a musical instrument, balancing on a tightrope, like that was the role of a gym owner and a professional CrossFit athlete. Going from that to and everybody being able to see me as that, to me walking into places and it doesn't even look like I worked out a day in my life, that I don't even know how to hold a hammer or like be strong in any manner. And seeing my own relationship to myself transition, as well as other people, how they see me. And the greatest thing about that is people were so much more nicer to me when I wasn't walking into the room clean cut and jacked. Especially because I used to wear tank tops everywhere. You know, like the people that are addicted to going to the gym and like tight shirts and short shorts. I still wear those types of clothing, but it just fits differently on me. I hold myself differently. And it's something that I encourage people to do. Some people spent their whole life not being athletic, and like my mom. And at 62 or 63, actually, because she started eating organic, I got her on my Purium superfoods. And now she started running marathons, and she has like 30 medals of races from like in her 60s. And she's about to be, so she's like 68, 69 right now. She's about to be 70, and she's half marathons, 5Ks, like crazy. And in this later aspect in her life, she gets to experience what it is to be athletic and what it is to be ranked and what it is to be injured because of a sport and how to get around that injury and be out in the sun struggling in the Hawaiian heat to run all of these races. And I think that it's one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves is starting a new chapter. I was going to say turn a page or start. Yeah, basically starting a new chapter of self. If you guys have, there's a documentary on Netflix that I watched a long time ago. It was a sushi documentary. Everybody loves, I forget the name of it, but it was about a family, and it was about like one specific guy or one specific restaurant, but multiple generations of sushi chefs. I don't know if they're called chefs, and they have a restaurant that's sold out for years in advance because they do one thing. They make sushi, and even the way they make their rice is as a result of like hundreds of years of developing this process. And so now I'm shifting gears to the alternative of writing a new chapter, which I think is awesome for development, but also digging deep into one aspect has its benefits as well. And I've also heard that the rich and the wealthy people don't promote doing whatever you would like to their kids, and it's all about taking over the family business. Because if you work on something for multiple generations, it's easier to be world class and take over societies essentially, because you have all the connections and the network and the knowledge and the ability to handle struggle from a wealth of wisdom, 100, 200 years of wisdom in a certain section of society. And so that's one benefit of sticking with something, especially if you can successfully implement that into your lineage and into your offspring and have them continue forward as you as a mentor. And so that apparently is one of the strategies for the families that pass on family businesses. But we all know that not all the siblings care so much about that. And some of those people want to be an artist. Some of those people want to go see the world. Some of those people would like to be an athlete and don't care that their father did something or their mother did something. Let's look at, so people were saying that your aura shines brighter and is far more magnetic when your focus is pointed in the right direction. I like that because it goes back to the chapter thing. How do you know when you're no longer pointed in the direction that is the most optimal for the greatest sense of self? Because if you're currently doing something, it's most likely the intention that you had at some point in the past. And if we can bring that awareness of attention into the present moment and think, is this right now the greatest expression of self, and is that in alignment? That's what's important, because sometimes it takes 5 to 10 years to reach the goal that we intended on, especially if we're beginning at this whole manipulating reality thing and harmonizing to what is. And we might have had an idea a long time ago that is created and manifested now. And we jump on it because we're like, I remember I was going for this then. And then we get into it and we're like, okay. And we forget to check in now and create from the present moment, because it contradicts what we were once upon a time intending on. And D just said, I think your spark dulls when you're heading in the wrong direction. Correct. So if you're feeling like you're dulling, that's as simple as checking in with now. And really, I was in a meeting with Dave Sandoval. We're on the board of Purium, and we were having a meeting yesterday, and he said, nothing that we're doing is sacred. As board members, we shouldn't feel that we can't bring up an aspect of our business that could upset somebody. Like, basically he was saying, like, don't think anything is too sacred to talk about. If something's going on, let's get it out and talk about it so that we can optimize it. And it's the same thing with our own life. Are we able to not take everything that's in our life that we've grasped it onto? Can we release and surrender? A lot of times what we are going for requires us to let go of what we currently have. And I would actually say that 100% of the times, if we're looking to go into a new bubble of reality and we're holding on to this current level of existence that we've framed around ourselves in regards to what we spend our time, our energy, our activity on, we're holding on to this reality. In order for us to even have a possibility of grasping onto a new reality, we must let go. And I used to teach movement to people, right? And so there's weightlifting, like bicep curls, where you're always holding on. You can always feel the pressure of the weight. And then there's a movement like a clean or a snatch, where if you guys have done those, you're lifting weight, you're lifting a barbell off the ground and you're explosively lifting it off the ground with your legs. And then it gets as high as it can go. And then you have to get underneath it like this with your arms extended. And there's a moment where you have to let go of that weight and reorient yourself around the barbell. And that is very challenging for people to do because they want to hold on and feel it the whole time. So with reality, letting go before we grasp onto something is something that is very scary. We don't have orientation to anything. If we're self-identified as, in my case, an athlete, and it's like, okay, well, what else is there? I'm letting go of this. Now it's just me. It's just you. It's just us in this moment. And that ability to be ourself, independent of whatever reality is forming around us, whatever relationships we have, whatever things we own, however much money's in the bank account, or whatever accolades we're getting achievements and we're getting recognized for. If we're comfortable with this letting go process and we're comfortable with who we are, then all of that other stuff doesn't matter so much, and we don't get so hammered down by when we're not letting go, but when somebody else's agenda makes it so that we have to let go of something. And so if you have constantly find yourself being things taken away from you and you are not okay with yourself, then practice doing it on your own. Practice letting go of what you have and being okay with this sense of self without the things. And then that's the paradox with the whole thing, is you don't even need to worry about what else you're going to grab onto, because you actually become more secure and stable as yourself, independent of these things. And so now you're in this moment of non-attachment. And in this moment of non-attachment, you attract everything. You're a magnet. Think about, if you don't have attachments, if you're not grabbing onto everything, you're completely open to magnetize reality to you. And that's all based on your thoughts, your feelings, your activities, and your intentions with the present moment. And that's our power as humans, is going through this practice of being aligned with self. And then it comes down to that intention, that vision. And that's not so easy. When I first started talking to people as a mentor, I have a degree in psychology. I'm a business owner. I taught people my entire life. And one of my first sort of noticings was that when I would ask people, which I don't really ask them anymore because it doesn't really matter, but back in the day, I would ask people, what do you want? And I would notice that 99 out of 100 people would not have an answer to that question. Now, like I said, I don't think that's a relevant question now, but at the time, it's a bit of information that 99 out of 100 people do not know what they crave, what they desire, where they feel great. But without me even having to ask, they know definitively what they hate and what they don't desire and what they don't want. I know that word want is etymologically meaning something else, but just from a general language standpoint, what they don't want, there's like 100% certainty of that. There's 100% grasping on to the identity that I'm in a reality where things are not working out, and this is why, and this is validation why that is, and this is proof, and this is what somebody else, a friend of mine, also said that makes this true, and you're holding on to this reality that everything is wrong. And you're staring at it. And it's literally defining everything. You become addicted. You become addicted chemically to this. And you also become neurologically programmed into seeing everything from this lens. And this is actually what happens within your body. Your chemicals are seeking out validation for this. Your neurotransmitters and the dendrites are creating pathways that validate this. And the whole function of your brain is to make sense. It's to validate your concept of things, and it's to find proof of that within reality. So if you're holding on to this everything sucks mentality, your brain is going to find validation of that. And once again, practicing letting go of things allows you to also let go of those stories, which then allows you to be open, not even needing a replacement, but the replacement and working on the skill of manifesting and getting things, that can be a step that is in front of some of us. And in certain aspects of my life, that's also something I'm currently practicing. In other aspects, there's this sensation of, it's okay, I'm here now, and whatever is floating through this reality is exactly perfect. And then oriented my mind and my emotions over finding that perfectness. Like what is the perfectness? Like, what is the reason for this? And not even necessarily needing an answer for it. I used to have this philosophy that questions and answers belong separated, because if you put them together, it kills both of them. And that a question is beautiful on its own and an answer is beautiful on its own as well. And so are we able to hold our relationship with reality, keeping all questions and all answers away from each other, so that these things are also not attached onto the matching answer that we learned in school is what we should do, but they're open to stimulate a whole bunch of other potentialities that aren't just the one correct answers that go into it. Does this answer mean a whole bunch of other things? Does this question, can we reach out and go a bunch of different places from this question without trying to find which one is the best? Because then it just implodes, and now you're looking to answer another question. Okay, enjoy this conversation, everybody. Thank you for the people that talked about, yeah, someone said it's all energy, right? Thank you for the communication. Thank you for the comments. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.